What we're watching is the collapse of an empire. In the next 6 months, we would see more change that we've had the last 50 years. And you need to be prepared for total chaos. We're going to have total chaos. It's the biggest change financially in 2,000 years. What you're hearing in the media is 100% incorrect. People keep falling for the same stupid stuff again and again and again. If Afghanistan was an embarrassment, Russia, Ukraine is going to be 10 times the embarrassment. But we just better hope that North Korea, China, and Russia don't sit down together and say, these people are mad dogs, and what do you do with the mad dog? You put him to sleep. If there is a nuclear conflict, we will be the ones to do it, and we will lose, and it will result in the destruction of the United States and probably of the world. The inflation is a global problem. It has not been solved. It is going to get worse, and it's going to be catastrophic.
What about cryptocurrency? I know you're pretty skeptical on crypto, and I've had a guest on recently, Lynette Zhang, and her theory is that crypto emerged post 2008 for a reason, and the reason was to discourage people from investing in precious metals, so to keep the price down. Bitcoin has some very questionable origins, and it seems like it would be a great way to prevent people from running up the price of gold so that central banks could continue to buy it. What is your take on cryptocurrency?
I have believed since 2017 that the cryptocurrencies are total fraud. And everything that I've seen seems to indicate that's true. Now, there's an article by Doomberg that literally came out today, and he talks about Binance, okay?
Yeah.
Which is a crypto exchange, the biggest crypto exchange. And he goes into Binance, and they're being investigated by the SEC and the TSX for fraud. I've seen some great work on Tether, and Tether is absolute fraud. I don't know if you remember, I guess this goes back 20 years, 25 years, but the Beanie Baby craze, okay? People were paying $1,500, $2,000 for a 79-cent stuffed toy. There is something about humans that they're always chasing some fraud. Okay. Yeah.
Greed.
People want to make, it's greed. They want to make a quick buck, and they think there's some easy way to do it. And there is no easy way to make a quick buck. If you're going to have money, you're going to have to go work for it. If you don't work for it, you're not going to value it. The cryptocurrencies are fraud. And that's just the issue of the cryptocurrencies. Of course, you'll have a lot of people think that I'm old and stupid, but I was a systems programmer for Ross Perot 60 years ago, so I'm not that stupid. There's another issue that nobody ever discusses that's even more important. Central banks would like to go to central bank digital currencies. Central bank digital currencies are not in the same category as the cryptocurrencies. They don't use the software. It's totally different.
Centralized. Yeah.
The central banks are simply not going to allow the cryptocurrencies to survive. And I think this, what this fellow's writing about today about Binance, it's very true, and they're going to whack it. But FTX was a good example. SBF,
BlockFi was another one that had collapsed. It was like you could put your crypto in there, and they'd give you some crazy amount of money every year, like 10%. It was a total scam, but yeah.
Here's the deal. Anytime you've got a lot of money, you're going to have a lot of fraud. The cryptocurrencies got up to $3.2 trillion and have shed 2.2 trillion already, which is actually more money than was lost in 2008 in the subprime crisis. It's incredible because they've got all these warning signs. Did you see what Elon Musk did with Dogecoin today?
Yeah, he changed his avatar to Dogecoin.
Yeah. Okay, I call it Dogecoin. I like Dogecoin better, but Dogecoin or Dogecoin. And bang, everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon and look at that. It's free money, found money. You don't have to think, all you have to do is throw money at it. So if $2.2 trillion has evaporated already and gone to crypto heaven, what's preventing the other $1 trillion from going to crypto heaven too? This is blockchain is a different form of technology than central bank digital currencies. And I think there's a lot of people who think that central banks are, we'll just go buy Bitcoin. And it's not going to happen. The cryptocurrencies are going to disappear. They're electronic beanie babies, and they're going to go away. And everybody's going to say, gee, why didn't somebody warn us?
It seems like the last vestiges of a dying civilization would be people trying to make like a quick buck because they were promised, this American dream. They were promised, cheap stuff and not having to work that much and, having that American exceptionalism. And now that it's starting to wither away, this is kind of like the final, this is the last act.
Actually not, okay? It's part of being human, okay? These scams have gone on for thousands of years, and they're going to continue going on. And I've written several finance books, and I talk about that issue exactly. People are always looking for a quick buck, and there are no quick bucks. You have to go earn it.
It's like the, what was it, the tulip scam?
Right.
Yeah. People were paying crazy amounts of money for tulips in the 19th century or something. Was that?
In the tulip bulb craze, I have read people would pay the value of a home in Amsterdam for one tulip bulb. And someone went to a gathering at a friend of his, and he was nibbling on the hors d'oeuvres, and he ate a $10,000 tulip bulb.
Yeah, people love a good scam, like you say. I think maybe the exceptionalism is thinking that this time is different, that now human nature has changed, when really we can't see it because we look back at, the cultures and civilizations of old and we think, oh, we're so much more evolved, but in reality, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. One last financial question before we get into the war stuff. What's your take on Warren Buffett's investment strategy? And I know he bought gold for the first time, or one of his people that he has working for him at Berkshire bought into a gold mining company. The reason why I ask is because I think he's not really in too much of an alarm mode right now, like somebody like Ray Dalio, for example. What is your take on Warren Buffett's optimism in light of his track record of being right?
Warren Buffett is a really interesting person. He's someone I would love to have lunch with. His father was a U.S. representative and very much a pro-gold advocate. And Warren Buffett personally hates gold, okay, and says, what sense does it make to go mine that stuff and then bury it in a vault somewhere? And that's a surprising approach to take, because Warren Buffett's entire investment thesis is to bet on inflation. I'm going to go buy something like Coca-Cola because I know the government's going to continue to inflate the currency. Therefore, my shares will go up. Warren Buffett has made billions of dollars betting on inflation, and that's such a simple bet that there's nothing tricky to it. But I believe that Warren Buffett's sitting on 130 billion, and it's got to be a real problem now. Where do you put the money? He's got it in short-term treasuries, but you don't put it into long-term treasuries. All of the companies are overinflated. So where do you put it? And quite bluntly, I find it interesting. He probably would make more money buying a gold mine than doing anything else with it. But he's got a problem. And part of the reason he doesn't care is because of his age. Okay. When you're 30, you worry about what's going to happen 50 years from now. When you're his age, you don't worry about what's going to happen 2 years from now.
Yeah, well, no, it's a very interesting take. Thanks for that. Now, with respect to, obviously, you've had some immense amount of military experience, a captain by 22, and all of the sorties that you flew. What can you tell us about what the media is getting wrong about this current conflict in Ukraine and between the Russians, and how NATO factors into the whole thing?
Okay, what you're hearing in the media is 100% incorrect. Vladimir Putin wanted the same thing that John F. Kennedy wanted in 1962. He wanted secure borders. And in December of 2021, he said, look, guys, no reason whatsoever for conflict. I want the U.S. to do what they agreed to do 30 years ago and not expand NATO. And I want Ukraine to do what they agreed to do in the Minsk II agreement. And we know that the United States lied and expanded NATO. It is in writing that the United States agreed prior to Germany being reunited to not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And they've added 13 countries, actually 14 countries, because Finland joined today. NATO is not a force for peace. NATO is a force for conflict. It doesn't help anyone. It should have been shut down 30 years ago because there was no need for it. The war in Ukraine was planned by the United States. It was instigated by the United States. And unfortunately, their sock puppet in Kiev is a blithering idiot who's on cocaine most of the time. And he has pumped hundreds of thousands of young Ukrainian men into a meat grinder at Bakhmut. And the Russians have just chewed them up. I have seen credible numbers of somewhere between 600 and 750,000 Ukrainians have been killed or wounded. That's a absolutely staggering number. The Ukrainians have lost more troops killed in the last year than the United States did in World War II.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So why do you think that the progress on the Russian side is so slow?
It appears to be slow. There was no winter conflict this year because it was such a warm winter, and it was an unusually warm winter. You can't fight with tanks when you've got mud because you can't move the tanks. So the war should have ended in February or March, but it never got too cold. Ukraine actually lost the war in March of last year. Nobody wants to talk about that, but Ukraine was ready to sit down at the table with Russia and give Russia what it wanted. And Boris Johnson walks in and said, no. We'll give you all this money. We'll give you all this equipment. You could steal as much as you want to. So Zelensky said, okay, we'll fight the very last Ukrainian. Ukraine has been destroyed as a country. Russia will end up occupying half of it, and Poland will probably end up occupying the other half. This is the swan song for the United States. It makes Afghanistan 20 years of conflict and $2.3 trillion look like brain surgery. This is the dumbest war that I've ever seen because there was nothing to gain from it and everything to lose. And the Europeans went along with it, and the Americans went along with it. And Russia and China are saying, okay, why don't we stop this stupidity? They just wanted Ukraine to do what they promised they would do. If you go back to the Minsk II agreement, the Minsk II agreement recognized Donbass was still part of Ukraine, and they would have some right in the future to determine exactly who would run them. Germany was part of it. France was part of it. The UK was part of it. And all of those countries have come out and said, well, we knew we were lying. We knew that it wasn't going to be enforced. We just wanted to give Ukraine time to add equipment and men. And they did. But I'm going to tell you, the Russians are tough. Those are people that I personally would not want to screw with. And they have demolished Ukraine. And the very best thing that could happen is a peace treaty as soon as possible, and for the Europeans to pull their head out of their butts and say, look, Russia's our neighbor. Russia gives us cheap energy. Russia gives us cheap food. Why are we in a conflict with Russia? And if they did that, the world would be far more prosperous.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's at all likely when you have the International Criminal Court putting out an arrest warrant for Putin. Like, it seems like we're moving in the complete opposite direction. You know, can you maybe speak to the realities of what a conflict between, like a conventional conflict between NATO and Russia would look like? Is it going to be a walk in the park like they're making out in the media, or is it going to be something else?
It would be a walk in the park, but it would be the opposite of what the media said. You just raised a really good question. This war has given everyone the opportunity to see if they could think for themselves. The United States does not belong, never signed the agreement for the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Russia has never agreed to be part of the International Criminal Court. For the ICC to come out and issue an arrest warrant for Putin, it is a gesture and nothing more than a gesture. Now, I don't know how much you remember about the end days of the Vietnam conflict. The charge of the ICC was that the Russians were kidnapping Ukrainian children and taking them to Russia, and that's a war crime. But if you go back to the very last days of the Vietnam War, the United States was flying plane loads of Vietnamese orphans from Vietnam to the United States. We were doing exactly what we're accusing Russia of doing today. Now, I'll give you something that's even better. I said that it gives everybody the chance to show if they could think for themselves. A UN official was being interviewed by a Chinese journalist a few days ago, and the Chinese journalist said, okay, what is the position of the UN and the American occupation of Syria? Is that a legal war? And the UN official hemmed and hawed and clearly didn't want to answer the question and said, well, it doesn't make any difference because there's no US troops in Syria. And the Chinese guy went, really? Okay. I thought that they just got shelled this weekend. They're accusing the Iranians of shelling an American base. Here's my problem. if you're going to get along in the world, you have to abide by the same rules that everybody else abides by. And the United States thinks that, we can abide by any rules we want to, and everybody else has to abide by the rules that we say. The ICC made a gesture, but it's a meaningless gesture. The UN made a gesture, and it's a meaningless gesture. But exactly the same thing is happening in New York City today with the city of New York prosecutor has brought 34 criminal charges against Trump. But what nobody's talking about is the DOJ looked into it and they didn't see a crime. The FBI looked into it and they didn't see a crime. The prosecutor for the state of New York looked into it and they didn't see a crime. And the two people that would be witnesses against Trump, which would be his former attorney and the hooker, have both agreed that it never took place in the first place. So what we're doing now is appearance without substance. And I guess, what we're watching is the collapse of an empire. The only thing you can do is go down to the store and buy a couple of barrels of popcorn and sit down at the boob tube and watch these fools do silly, stupid things.
So there is a risk, though, that the conflict doesn't end in Ukraine, obviously, because we're talking about the collapse of a debt-based system that is being run by who knows who, coming up against the emerging resource-based economies of Russia and China. There's a situation in Taiwan, there's a situation in the Korean Peninsula, there's a situation in the Middle East and Ukraine. What is your best guess about how this thing plays out in the next year or so?
Okay, I'm going to make some guesses, but I'm going to qualify that by saying these are just guesses. These are things that could happen, and in some cases should happen. And it goes back to the analogy of the 1,000 black swans flying overhead. The United States has done its very best to antagonize North Korea, and North Korea has nuclear weapons. If North Korea wanted to attack South Korea tomorrow, they could wipe out Seoul, which is 30 miles away from the DMZ, in the first 15 minutes. Walking into a bar and saying, I'm the toughest guy in the bar and I can kick anybody's booty is a really bad idea when you're 5'2" and you weigh 300 pounds. The United States is bloated. We don't have the power that we thought we had. We have a total corruption at every level of government in the United States. So antagonizing the rest of the world is a bad idea. Now, frankly, from a legal point of view, and this is historic in nature, the United States has always agreed that Taiwan is part of China. So why they would want to antagonize the Chinese is beyond me. And I think that when Russia has defeated Ukraine, which I expect to see in the next 2-3 months, I think Taiwan is going to look at it and say, we need to sit down with the Chinese and see what we can work out. I don't see any reason for a conflict between Taiwan and China. I don't look at China as the enemy, even though there's a lot of things that China does that I don't particularly agree with. It's their country and they get to make the rules.
So you think that so you think that the outcome of the Ukraine conflict will determine what happens with China and Taiwan?
Actually, it's going to determine what happens to the United States. Well, we got booted out of Afghanistan. We got booted out. We ran out of Afghanistan with our tail between our legs. There are some really great pictures of hundreds of vehicles that they have rebuilt there are pictures of pallets of brand new $100 bills. We left tens of millions of dollars in brand new $100 bills, and never occurred to anybody to shove them on the airplane and take them with them. If Afghanistan was an embarrassment, Russia, Ukraine is going to be 10 times the embarrassment. And clearly, anybody who looks at it, Ukraine has lost the war. Their military has been destroyed. Their economy has been destroyed. And they're going to turn around and say, okay, who's going to help rebuild us? And Europe's going to look at it and say, rebuild you? I thought you guys were winning the war. So there's bad things. Now, Scott Ritter says there's a 70% chance of it going nuclear. I don't think so, but it's because I think that Putin is sane and Biden's insane. And the only question is, Biden's so insane that he would start a nuclear war. And there's a very real risk. I don't put it at 70%, but I think it could easily be 50%.
It seems. Why do you think that the United States is holding back? And obviously, you have this firsthand experience being a fighter pilot in Vietnam, so you've seen a proxy war which is very similar to this one. Why is the United States not holding back in its? I mean, that's probably an overstatement because they've obviously provided hundreds of billions of dollars. But why aren't they sending the tanks and like more Abrams, more fighter jets? Why aren't they giving Ukraine full support and only giving it this partial support?
Because they have sent a couple of hundred A-10s to Poland that are literally right on the border. The M1 Abrams tank requires a refueling vehicle, and it burns through something like 600 gallons of fuel an hour. Okay, that's the kind of fuel that we used to burn in an F4. Okay, the M1 is so heavy that most of the roads, most of the places they would take it, the M1 is just totally unsuitable for conflict in Ukraine. And the American aircraft wouldn't last 5 minutes in combat. The Russians are using weapons that I never even dreamed of. And it's scary to me they've been so effective. I'll give the Ukrainians credit for being brave enough to go into battle, but they're losing 70 or 80% of the people. In Roman times, to be decimated means you lost 10% of your people. Even the Ukrainians are admitting they're losing 70 to 80% of their combat soldiers every time they put them into combat. This has been a horrible war, and the reason it appears to be slow is Putin is deliberately keeping it slow to keep the number of Russians killed and injured at a minimum. So the ratio between Ukrainian dead and wounded and Russian dead and wounded is probably 6 to 10 to 1.
It's interesting. So you're saying that the U.S. military equipment is more adapted to other environments, maybe desert environments, or even like what you guys dealt with in Vietnam there, as opposed to the plains of Europe?
Every war the United States has fought, going back to World War II, the end of World War II, we were not fighting against equal opponents. In Vietnam, we were not fighting for the South Vietnamese. We were fighting for DuPont, and we were fighting for Convair, and we were fighting for Boeing, and we were fighting for Douglas. We were not fighting for freedom. The military-industrial complex has run the United States since the time Eisenhower was president. Both Eisenhower and MacArthur recognized the danger of the military-industrial complex. And the reason that Trump's being indicted and charged in court today It was because Trump said he's going to clean out the swamp, and the military industrial complex doesn't want the swamp cleaned out.
I find it unsettling then that the U.S. has made some alterations to their nuclear doctrine last year. If you're saying that conventionally they're not prepared to engage Russia, but it appears as though in some way, shape, or form our financial system is contingent on this war going in our favor. Uh, is there a possibility that we're the ones that initiate some sort of nuclear conflict?
If there is a nuclear conflict, we will be the ones to do it, and we will lose, and we will obviously lose in one day. It's not going to be a war that goes on for 2 or 3 years. It's going to be a war that's going to last one day, and it would result in the destruction of the United States and probably of the world.
I like to be more optimistic about our governments and our democracy or republic or whatever we call it, but it seems like at every turn, like you said, we've been told these colossal lies. And I think the ultimate colossal lie would be that we would never be the ones to engage in an unconventional war with the Russians or initiate an unconventional war. But when you look at, everything in the last 3 years, it makes you really wonder, is that their last ditch plan to try to, thwart the East emerging as in a new multipolar world?
That's what their belief is, but they are totally, absolutely clueless. How many nuclear weapons would it take to destroy the United States totally?
Probably, it depends. Maybe you think one?
If you drop an EMP weapon,
EMP. Yeah. Trick
300
question.
miles over Kansas, you will fry every computer chip in the United States, and a year later, 90% of people will be dead. It is not Russia that is at risk, even though the United States thinks they've got all this power. It's the United States that's at risk. And we just better hope that North Korea, China, and Russia don't sit down together and say, these people are mad dogs, and what do you do with the mad dog? You put him to sleep. This is exceptionally dangerous, and the sooner the war in Ukraine is ended, the better, and the United States isn't going to win.
Interesting. So I know you have this extensive history as a fighter pilot and the military experience. From a preparedness standpoint, obviously you encourage people to invest in various different precious metals. Do you have any just survival and preparedness tips that you can give us with respect to how to endure difficult times?
Strange enough, you're actually the person that is best equipped to do that. I can talk about from a financial point of view, and what I've said for years is physical gold, silver. The primary purpose is as an insurance policy against financial chaos. And the beauty about now is it's still an insurance policy against financial chaos, but the house is burning down and you could still buy the insurance policy, which is a good idea. But you are a professional. You know what you're talking about. You've got the equipment. You can talk to people. People need to realize they're on their own. You need to keep fuel in the car. You need to have an escape bag. You need to have spare cash. You need to have 6 months food, and you need to be prepared for total chaos. We're going to have total chaos. I don't give a damn about all these people saying, oh, no, it's 2008. It's not 2008. It's the biggest change financially in 2,000 years. And there are two choices. One choice is to go the World Economic Forum route, and we all become slaves to the 1%. And the other choice is freedom. And people need to stand up and say, I'm either going to opt for freedom or, these chains fit just fine. But it's time to educate yourself, and it's time to listen to the people who make sense rather than who work for the government. I've never seen a better analogy than COVID for how much you should believe what governments tell you. Everything the government tells you now is a lie. The government would like to have more and more and more power, and we need to have less and less and less government. That's certainly true in Canada. I mean, I was absolutely astonished at the truckers' convoy. I think those were the bravest people that I've ever seen. It was not organized. There was no self-interest there whatsoever. It was a bunch of Canadians saying, look, we're tired of the government lying to us and forcing us to do things that we know are not good for us. And for Trudeau and Freeland to crack down on the truckers was absolutely remarkable. The truckers were the bravest people I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've heard you say that, what was the exact quote? In the next few months, we're going to see more change than we have. There's going to be 50 years worth of change. What was the exact quote?
In the next 6 months, we would see more change than we've had the last 50 years. And I'll prove to you that's true. When the Prime Minister of China went to sit down with Putin, when he was leaving, he said, you realize that we're going to have 100 years of change happening shortly. And Putin said, yes, and we're going to be part of it. So they recognize that it's the biggest change in 2,000 years. And I just kind of guessed that it was going to happen. And it certainly appears. The last 3 weeks have been remarkable to me. And it scares me because I don't know what the hell the next 3 weeks is going to bring.
Well, I appreciate when you say that I'm probably the guy to go to for a lot of preparedness advice, but, I really respect your perspective because obviously you've seen, several generations now, and you've had that firsthand experience being on the front lines of combat. And I guess what I'm hoping for is, maybe some psychological or motivational tips on, what were some things that you did when you had to go on those missions that you were able to have the strength and courage to do that?
Unfortunately, I believed all the lies I was told. And the interesting thing is, and this is something I haven't spent a lot of time discussing, but I believe I am not a pacifist. I am exactly the opposite of a pacifist. I am a warrior. I've been there. I've done that. I would do it again tomorrow if my country was threatened. But we weren't threatened in Vietnam. It was a bad war. It was a war that we should have never fought. I flew with some very brave people, and unfortunately, we believed all the lies we were told. So the most important thing that people can do to prepare is to learn to think. Do not believe something just because the media tells you or the government tells you, because they are going to lie. They are going to try to keep themselves in power. But this is absolutely a time to be thinking about, where do I want to be that I can be safe? And I'm in the south of France, in a little tiny village and a little tiny mill. I can generate my own power here. It's a farming community, so there's plenty of food here. There's a very small drug problem. There's a very small crime problem. I'm in one of the safest places that I could be. Now, if I was 30 years old or 40 years old, that wouldn't be as true because I would have to be thinking about the future. I need to think about 5 or 10 years in the future. You need to think about 30 or 40 years in the future. But it is a time to be prepared. And basically, people need to stand up and say, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to think, and I'm going to protect my family.
Yeah, I like that old saying, it's if you know how to think, you don't need to know what to think. So, if people can just continue to be critical in their thinking and think independently and not go too off the deep end, because it's easy to do that on the internet as well. You've been on the internet since 96, I think, is when you started your website. So you've been around for a while, so you know how easily people can go down rabbit holes they shouldn't by thinking for themselves also. But knowing when to put the brakes on is equally as important. With respect to gold, and this is kind of the last set of questions I have for you. One of my concerns with gold is obviously you have to have it on your person, or you have to store it, or you have to cash it away. Is there a risk, as there has been in the past, of government confiscation when times get tough?
No.
You don't think so?
No chance. They don't know who's got it.
Okay, but didn't they put in a law, was it back in the 30s or something, that you couldn't own gold?
Here's what they can do. And it's very important to understand the limits of government power. When Roosevelt took office in March 1933, two things he did. One is he forced everyone to turn in their gold. Gold was $20.75 an ounce. Everybody had to turn their gold in. And he forced the banks to close, and they were closed for a week, and only about half of them reopened. And then he raised the price of gold to $35 an ounce. But people had gold in banks then, and it was easy for the government to seize it. Now, governments don't know who's got the gold. They don't know who's got the silver. And the fact of the matter is, people are going to realize, in a totally chaotic world where nothing works, are you going to worry about the government laws, or are you going to worry about survival? And I'm going to tell you flat out, they're going to worry about survival.
Yeah. And what about silver? What are your thoughts on silver being used as a medium of exchange when the smoke clears?
There's two parts to that question. It's kind of interesting. My best friend in mining is Quentin Henning, who's one of the top geologists in the world. And he and I sat down and designed a financial system for the world back in 2008 or 2009. And it's based around gold and silver in grams. So rather than there being Canadian dollars and US dollars and British pounds and euros, everybody would have gold and silver in grams. Now, the problem with gold is that even a 1/10 ounce gold coin, which is a little tiny coin, it's 3 grams, it's still about $70 US. Okay, so how do you pay for a $10 food bill with a $70 coin? And the answer is you don't. In a gold and silver based system, the metal that's most in demand is going to be silver. Okay, when I was a kid, our dimes were made of silver, our quarters, our halves, our silver dollars, and you reached in your pocket. You knew you were holding something real. And they stopped making those coins in 1965. I think Canada was still producing them until 1966 or 1967. We will go back to that because people are not going to trust central banks, and they're not going to trust governments.
Yeah, I don't know how optimistic I am about that. I think that, we were all duped into carrying around a little device that can track all our movements and record all our conversations, and we're all duped into posting all of our thoughts and biographies online. I have a sneaking suspicion that people will demand the CBDCs when the rug gets pulled, and when the system collapses, people will demand the government do something. And there will be those people like us who go the other direction, but I'm not so confident that it's going to be adopted by the masses.
The Chinese have tried to introduce a central bank digital currency, and it didn't work. And Nigeria tried to do it, and it didn't work. It is the antithesis of freedom. It is giving 100% control of your life to the government. And I don't see it's happening. I don't think it's a long-term solution. I do recognize the governments would certainly like to impose it. However, I don't believe they're successful. And Switzerland has just passed a law and said you're always going to be able to use currency. I think more and more people would do it, but we're going to have some big changes because of the Russians and the Chinese, and that's going to include freedom from central bank digital currencies. The debt-based system of the United States, or debt-based system of the West, is on its last legs. It's collapsing.
Well, I appreciate you coming out today, and we hope to have you back once again for sure as this whole thing progresses. Where's the best place that people can find more information about you and your books? Obviously, you have lots of books on Amazon. I'll post links to those in the comment section below. But is there any other place? Do you got a YouTube channel yet?
I actually, it's really funny because here's what happened. I had done very few interviews up until about a year ago. And then I looked around and there was so much just bad information that I said, I've got to do more interviews. I've got a free website at 321gold.com, and they can go to Amazon and put in my name. And there's about a dozen books there, everything from short fiction to serious investment advice. Everything that I do for free. The books, I think all of my books you can buy for 99 cents in electronic format. And if you can't afford 99 cents, you probably shouldn't be investing.
Yeah, well, I think your website, it's a little old school, but I think it gets like over 100,000 hits a day or something. So, I mean, you must be doing something right.
It's about 50,000.
50,000. That's a lot. Yeah. And well, I hope that you keep doing the interviews and maybe even start your own YouTube channel, because I think people would be interested in hearing more about what you have to say. I know the first time I heard you on the Reluctant Preppers, they used to be called Reluctant Preppers. I think they have a different name now. But I said, I got to get this guy on because he clearly knows his stuff. So guys, go and check out 321gold.com and 321energy.com. And if you have questions for Bob, put them in the comment section below and we'll get them back, and hopefully he'll come back and answer those. Thanks a lot for coming out.
Good deal. What I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to help people like you. I admire you tremendously. You're doing something that's very valuable. If I can help you, I'm going to do it.
Well, the feeling's mutual. When you said that, you admire what I'm doing here, I was pretty taken aback because, listening to what you have to say, it's pretty powerful stuff. So the honor is all mine. So thanks for coming, and we'll definitely be having you back.
Good deal.
Right on.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.